The Hells Angels biker found the little girl starving near a collapsed barracks room, and rebuilding it rekindled his lost purpose. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. As the cold night set in over the deserted landscape, Jake Reaper Morrison, a seasoned Hells Angels biker, was on his way to a long-forgotten town. His Harley-Davidson rumbled through the empty streets, the sound echoing off the cracked pavement. It had been a rough couple of months for him, riding aimlessly across the country, trying to outrun the emptiness that had settled in his soul. He had lost his purpose, and no amount of road or wind in his face could fill the void. But tonight, something felt different. As he approached the outskirts of a dilapidated barracks, he noticed something strange. A small, faint figure huddled by the remains of a collapsed building. His instincts screamed at him to keep moving, but something held him back. He slowed his bike and pulled to a stop. The figure was a little girl, no older than 8, her clothes torn and her skin pale. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her tiny body shook from both the cold and hunger. She was barely conscious, struggling to stay upright against the rubble. Jake's heart, hardened by years of violence and loss, skipped a beat. He had seen a lot in his time, people in pain, the wreckage of broken lives. But this was different. Without a second thought, he dismounted and approached her slowly, his heavy boots crunching against the debris. "Hey there." Jake's voice was rough, but he tried to soften it. The little girl flinched at his presence, her eyes darting around as if expecting danger. "I'm not here to hurt you," Jake added, crouching down in front of her, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. The girl didn't respond, only whimpered softly, her breath shallow. Her frailty was haunting, and Jake felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced in a long time, the need to protect. He gently scooped her into his arms, careful not to jostle her too much. The weight of her body was nothing compared to the weight of the decision he had just made. He wasn't sure why he did it. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, or maybe it was because he had been running from his own demons for so long that he forgot what it meant to save someone else. As he rode toward the nearest town, the wind howling in his face, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was no accident. There was something about this little girl, about this moment, that was pulling him back to life. But what was it? What was this strange connection that felt so strong, so undeniable? The road ahead seemed endless, but for the first time in months, Jake didn't feel so alone. He wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but he knew that this little girl, this lost soul, had just given him a reason to fight again. I had never imagined that a night like this would change everything. The cold wind bit at my face as I rode through the quiet streets, my mind still reeling from what had just happened. The little girl in my arms, fragile and small, had fallen unconscious on the back of my Harley. I could feel the heat from her tiny body pressed against mine, and every bump in the road made me more determined to get her to safety. The sound of my bike's engine roaring through the night was the only thing that kept me grounded as I sped toward the nearest town. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. A child, alone and starving, left to fend for herself. No one should have to experience that kind of pain. I had seen a lot in my years as a Hells Angel, but this was different. This wasn't just a fight for survival or a matter of vengeance. This was something deeper, something that made me question the life I had been living. I had lost my way, but maybe, just maybe, this little girl could help me find it again. I pulled into a small town just before dawn. The streets were empty, save for a few stray cats scavenging for food. I found an old, rundown motel and parked my bike. The girl stirred in my arms, and I carefully laid her down on the bed in the room. She was so small, so vulnerable. I checked her injuries, but there were no major cuts or bruises. Her pale face, however, told a different story. She had been through hell. I could tell by the way her eyes fluttered open, how she winced from the pain in her bones. She had been starving for days, maybe even longer. I wasn't sure how to help her, but I knew I couldn't just leave her here. She needed someone. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was that someone. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and held it to her lips. Her hand trembled as she took a sip, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of trust in her eyes. I wasn't used to this. I wasn't used to being trusted or needed. It had been so long since I had cared about anything beyond myself, beyond the Hell's Angels and the endless road. But something about this girl, something about her helplessness, her pain, made me feel like I had a purpose again. She finished the water and let out a soft sigh, closing her eyes as if she had finally found some comfort. I sat down beside her, not knowing what to say. I wasn't good with words, especially with people. I had never been good at caring for anyone. But here I was, sitting in this dingy motel room, trying to figure out how to help a little girl who had no one else. I ran my fingers through my beard, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. This wasn't the life I had imagined for myself. I had been a part of something bigger, something dangerous, something that had given me a sense of belonging. But now, with this little girl in front of me, I realized that what I had been a part of didn't matter anymore. I wasn't sure where to go from here. I didn't even know her name, but I knew I couldn't leave her. As the hours passed, I watched over her, making sure she was warm and comfortable. I didn't know how to fix everything she had been through, but I knew I could keep her safe, at least for now. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was doing something right. The road ahead was still uncertain, but maybe this was the start of something new. Maybe, just maybe, I had found a reason to keep going. I sat there, staring at the little girl sleeping on the bed. The room was quiet now, the only sound the occasional hum of the neon sign outside flickering in the wind. I had stayed up most of the night, watching over her, making sure she didn't wake up frightened or confused. The fragile trust she had placed in me, even in her state of exhaustion, felt like the first thing I had earned in years. But I knew that trust didn't come easily. For her, it probably never had. I was no stranger to pain, to the loneliness that could come with life on the road. But this was something else, something deeper. I ran my hand over my face, exhausted but somehow alert, as if waiting for something to happen. The girl had not spoken much, but I noticed the little things, the way her fingers clenched the blanket, the way she would glance at me every now and then with a mixture of fear and hope in her eyes. There was a lot I needed to do, but first, I needed to know her name. I couldn't keep thinking of her as the little girl, or the one I saved. She deserved more than that. My boots clicked lightly against the floor as I stood up and grabbed the phone from the table. The battery was low, but there was enough charge to make a call. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It rang a few times before a familiar voice came through. Jake. The voice was rough, tired, but unmistakable. It was my old friend, Murphy. Yeah, it's me. I need some help, I said, my voice sounding rougher than I had intended. What's going on? Murphy asked, his concern evident despite the years. I found a kid. She's in bad shape. I don't know where her parents are, but I can't leave her like this. I paused for a moment, trying to figure out how to put everything into words. She's alone, Murphy. She's alone, and she's scared. Murphy was silent for a long time. I could hear the faint rustling of paper in the background, his usual office noises. Finally, he spoke. All right, Jake. I got you. Let me make some calls. You keep her safe. I'll be there soon. I hung up the phone and sighed, feeling a weight lift off my chest. Murphy had always been there for me, even when the rest of the world had turned its back. Now, he was going to help me with this little girl. I didn't know what the future held, but at least for now, she wasn't alone. I walked back over to the bed and sat down beside her. Her breathing was steady now, her small chest rising and falling with each breath. She had finally found some peace, at least for the moment. I couldn't help but think about my own life, my own mistakes. I had spent years running, hiding from everything I had done. But now, here I was, caring for a child who had nothing. I was a Hell's Angel. I had hurt people. I had been part of a brotherhood built on fear and violence. But this little girl? She had nothing to do with that. She had no reason to trust me, but she did. That was something I had to take seriously. I wasn't sure what came next. I wasn't sure how to fix all the damage I had caused, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her go. Not like this. Not now. I stood up again, pacing the room, feeling restless. There was so much to figure out, so much I didn't know. But I couldn't let that stop me. I had spent too many years running from my past. This was my chance to make something right. My chance to protect her. I didn't know how to be a parent. I didn't know how to take care of a child, but I did know how to protect what was mine. And she, for now, was mine to protect. The sun began to rise outside, casting a dim light over the room. I watched the first rays of morning creep across the floor, their warmth breaking through the coldness that had surrounded me for so long. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the second chance I had been looking for. I didn't know where this journey would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. As I looked down at the little girl, I made a silent vow to myself. I would protect her. I would keep her safe, no matter what it took. And maybe, just maybe, I would find my own redemption along the way. I sat in the dim light of the motel room, the faint hum of the neon sign outside doing little to soothe the unease gnawing at me. The little girl was still asleep, her small chest rising and falling with each breath. I had done everything I could to make her comfortable, but I knew the battle wasn't over. It wasn't just about keeping her safe for the night. It was about finding a way forward, a future where she wasn't just another casualty of a cruel world. I couldn't let her fall through the cracks like so many others I had seen. My fingers drummed lightly against the worn surface of the table. The girl stirred slightly, her brow furrowing before she slowly opened her eyes. She blinked at the light, confused for a moment, before her gaze locked onto mine. For a second, she seemed unsure, as if wondering if I was real, if I was still the same man who had taken her away from the cold and the darkness. "Hey," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "How are you feeling?" She didn't answer at first, just sat up slowly, her small frame shaking slightly. I could see the fear in her eyes, the wariness of someone who had learned too early that trust could be easily broken. I didn't blame her. I wasn't exactly the poster child for reliability, and I had no illusions about that. But I was determined to change that. "I'm not going anywhere," I told her. "You're safe here. You're not alone." Her eyes flickered with something like hope, but then she looked down at her hands, her shoulders slumping. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to break the silence. She hesitated for a moment, then whispered, "Emma." Emma. It was a simple name, but it meant so much. It felt like a lifeline, something solid in this chaotic, unpredictable world. "Emma." I repeated, tasting the name on my tongue. "I'm Jake. I'm here to help." She nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt still clouding her eyes. I didn't blame her for it. She had been let down before, and I couldn't expect her to just trust me because I said I was trustworthy. I wasn't sure if I could even trust myself, but I would try. I had to. "Do you remember what happened?" I asked gently. She shook her head, her eyes darting away. It was clear she didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't press. The past was something I knew all too well. I had my own ghosts, my own things I would rather forget. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Eventually, I stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the empty street. The morning light was creeping in, and I knew it wouldn't be long before the world outside started moving again, resuming its normal rhythm. I wasn't sure where Emma and I fit into that rhythm. I wasn't sure if we could. I heard her shift on the bed, the rustling of the blankets pulling me back from my thoughts. "I don't want to go back," she said quietly. Her voice was small, fragile, as if she was afraid to speak too loudly. "You won't," I assured her. I turned around and looked at her, meeting her gaze. "I'm not going to let anyone hurt you again. Not while I'm here." She bit her lip, clearly holding back tears. I could see the pain in her eyes, the things she had already endured. And for a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. I had spent so many years turning a blind eye to the suffering of others, burying my own pain in the process. But now, here was this little girl, looking to me for something I hadn't even known I was capable of giving. She needed me. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I needed her too. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew that. I had no idea what the future held, or what I was even supposed to do next. But I knew I couldn't walk away. Not from her. Not from this. I walked over to the bed and sat down beside her, my hand resting gently on her shoulder. "We're in this together." "Okay," I said. "You and me. We'll figure it out." She nodded slowly, and for the first time since I found her, I saw a flicker of trust in her eyes. It was small, but it was there. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to start believing that maybe, just maybe, I could fix something broken inside of me. And maybe, just maybe, I could help her do the same. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching as Emma slowly ate the small meal I had managed to gather. She didn't say much, but she ate with a quiet determination, as if the food was something she had been deprived of for too long. The way she hesitated before taking each bite made it clear that hunger wasn't the only thing she had been starving for. It was trust and safety. I could see it in her eyes. The wariness, the fear that I might turn on her like everyone else had. She didn't know how to let someone in. And honestly, I wasn't sure I knew how to let anyone in either. But here we were, strangers, both of us, with nothing left to lose. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to sort out the thoughts in my head. This wasn't just about keeping her safe for a night. I knew that now. She needed more than that. She needed something I wasn't sure I could give her: stability, hope, a future. I hadn't had a future in years. My life had been a series of fleeting moments, of rides through the night, of finding fleeting satisfaction in the wrong places. But something about this little girl, about her fragility, about her brokenness, made me realize that maybe I still had a chance to do something real. Something good. "You okay?" I asked, turning to look at her. She was staring down at her plate, pushing the food around with her fork. She didn't answer right away, and I wasn't sure if she heard me or if she was just lost in her own thoughts. But then, slowly, she nodded. "Yeah," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm okay." I knew better than to push her for more. She wasn't ready to talk about what had happened to her. I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. But I couldn't leave it there. I couldn't let her think that she was alone in this. "Listen, Emma," I began, my voice soft but firm. "I don't know what's happened to you, but I want you to know something." She looked up at me then, her eyes wide, searching. "You're safe here. You're not going anywhere, and I'm not going to leave you." The words felt strange coming from my mouth. I had spent so many years running from people, from everything that mattered. But now, looking at her, I realized that I wasn't just running away from my past. I was running towards something else. Something that felt worth fighting for. I could see the hesitation in her eyes, the doubt. I didn't blame her. She had learned early on not to trust anyone. But I was willing to show her that I wasn't like the others. I wasn't going to let her slip through my fingers, not this time. The silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Emma placed her fork down and met my gaze. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The question took me off guard. It was a question I had asked myself for the past few hours. Why was I doing this? Why was I sitting here, watching over her, when I had never cared about anyone this much before? "Because you need someone," I said simply, my voice steady. "And I guess I need someone too." The words hung in the air between us, the honesty of them sinking in. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to fix everything she had gone through. But I knew I couldn't turn away. Not now. Not when she had already started to trust me, even if just a little. I sat back down on the bed, my mind racing with the decisions I had to make. I couldn't keep her here forever. I had to figure out what to do next. But right now, the most important thing was that she knew she wasn't alone. And I wasn't going to abandon her like everyone else had. I had spent years trying to escape my past, my mistakes. But maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to face the future, even if I didn't know what it held. And for once, that didn't scare me. Not with her. Here. Not with Emma. The next few days would be critical. I needed to find out what had happened to her, who had hurt her, and why she was alone. But I also needed to keep her safe. I couldn't let anyone get to her. I couldn't let anyone hurt her. The world outside still seemed cold and unforgiving, but in this small, run-down motel room, I made a silent promise to myself. I would protect her. I would give her the one thing she had never had. A chance. And maybe, in the process, I would find my own chance to rebuild the life I had destroyed. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the window. The soft, steady rhythm was a far cry from the usual noise of the open road. I stretched, feeling the weight of the night slip off me slowly. Emma was still asleep, her small form curled under the blankets. I looked over at her, a quiet sense of responsibility growing inside me. It had been a few days now, and in that time, I had learned that the road ahead wasn't just about surviving for myself. I had someone else to care for now. Someone who depended on me. I got up quietly, trying not to disturb her, and moved over to the small kitchenette in the corner. I hadn't bothered with much in this room. Just enough to get by. A quick meal, something warm to drink, and a quiet space to think. But today, things felt different. The weight of the promise I'd made to her the night before felt heavier than it had a few hours ago. I couldn't protect her from the world forever. Sooner or later, we'd have to face it. I couldn't keep her in this small room forever, either. She deserved more than that. She needed to feel safe, not just physically but emotionally. I had to help her heal, not just protect her from harm. I grabbed a cup of coffee from the counter and walked back to the bed, sitting down beside her. The storm outside hadn't let up, and the soft rumble of thunder rolled through the air. Emma shifted slightly, her eyes fluttering open as she stretched. "Morning," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She blinked at me for a moment, still groggy, then sat up and looked around, her eyes still clouded with confusion. "Is it morning already?" she asked quietly, her voice still thin and uncertain. "Yeah," I said. "You need anything?" She shook her head, the quiet look on her face saying more than words ever could. She didn't know what to say, and I didn't know how to help her say it. I could tell she was still processing everything that had happened. I knew it wasn't just the hunger or the cold that had affected her. It was everything. Her whole world had been turned upside down, and I could see it in the way she looked at the world, in the way she flinched when I came too close. She was afraid. Afraid of me, afraid of the world. But most of all, afraid of getting hurt again. "You know," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, "I don't know what happened to you, but I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you want me to." She looked at me, her brow furrowed, as if trying to process what I said. "But why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you help me?" The question caught me off guard. She had no idea why I was here, why I'd taken her in, why I wasn't just leaving her to figure things out on her own. The answer was simple, but I wasn't sure how to say it. I wasn't sure how to explain it. "Because you need someone," I said after a moment. "And right now, I'm the only someone who's here. I'm not going to leave you. Not now." She was quiet for a long time, her eyes darting away from mine as she processed my words. I could see the conflict in her, the tug-of-war between the fear of trusting someone and the deep longing for that very trust. It wasn't easy for her. And honestly, it wasn't easy for me, either. I had spent years running from anything that required me to care about it. People, relationships, attachments, they only led to pain. I knew that from experience. But this time was different. For the first time in a long time, I didn't want to run. I wanted to help. I wanted to make a difference. "I'll stay with you," I added. "As long as you need me." She looked at me then, her gaze softening. She didn't say anything at first, just nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. I wanted to believe that meant something. But I also knew that the road to healing wasn't going to be easy for either of us. I didn't know what kind of help she needed. I didn't know how to fix the things that had been broken in her, the things she was too afraid to talk about. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going anywhere. I would be here for her, no matter what. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward both of us healing. As the rain continued to fall, I sat there beside her, my arm casually resting behind her, offering her the one thing I could give, safety. We would take it one day at a time. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew I had a responsibility to her now. She wasn't just some kid I found on the side of the road. She was someone who needed me. And for once in my life, I wasn't going to walk away. I stood in the doorway, watching as Emma slowly moved around the small room. She had started to take a few steps more each day, her body getting stronger after what had been a long stretch of weakness. But even as her physical health improved, I could see her mind still had a long way to go. The ghosts of her past were there, hidden in her eyes, in the way she avoided looking at anyone for too long, in the way she flinched when a door slammed shut. I didn't expect things to change overnight. Hell, I didn't expect much to change at all. But I knew I couldn't force it. I couldn't make her forget what she'd been through. All I could do was be there, a steady presence, and try to show her that life could be different now. That maybe, just maybe, she could start to heal. I had my own demons to face, too. I had spent my whole life running, hiding behind a wall I had built to keep people out. But now, it was like that wall was crumbling piece by piece, and I didn't know how to stop it. Every time I looked at Emma, I realized how much of my life I had wasted, how much time I had thrown away being part of something that didn't mean anything. But now, there was this chance. A chance to make something right. A chance to help someone who deserved better. I walked into the room, feeling the tension in the air between us, and sat down on the bed next to her. She was sitting by the window, staring out at the rain that had started to fall again. It seemed like the weather reflected what we were both going through, gray, uncertain, filled with more questions than answers. "You okay?" I asked softly, not wanting to intrude, but needing to know if she was still carrying whatever heavy burden she was keeping inside. Emma didn't turn to look at me. She just shrugged. "I'm fine," she said quietly, but her voice lacked conviction. It was the kind of reply that made me realize how little she had learned to trust, how little she knew of the idea that people could care about her without any strings attached. I couldn't blame her. I had been the same way once, someone who had learned to survive on my own, to protect myself from the world. But now, I had to learn how to be something else, something better. "You don't have to be fine," I said, my voice steady but gentle. "You can talk if you want. Or not, if you don't feel like it. Just know I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." It wasn't the best I could say. Hell, I wasn't even sure it made sense. But it was the truth. She had no idea how hard it had been for me to sit there, to admit to myself that I cared enough to help her, that I wasn't just some guy who rode through life with no real purpose. "I don't know what to say," she finally whispered, her voice so quiet it almost got lost in the sound of the rain. "You don't have to say anything," I replied, trying to make her feel comfortable. "But I'll listen if you want to talk. It's your call." She was silent for a long time, staring at the window, the light from the street lamps casting shadows on her face. She wasn't crying, but there was something in her expression that told me she was holding back tears. And maybe that was a start. She was allowing herself to feel something. It was a small step, but it was something. I didn't want to push her, so I just sat there, my presence a quiet comfort. Eventually, she let out a shaky breath and wiped at her face with the back of her hand. "I'm scared," she said softly, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I stayed silent, letting her find her words. "I don't want to go back. I don't want to be alone again." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't know what had happened to her, what she had been through, but I knew it had been something brutal, something that had made her believe she would always be alone. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I wasn't going to let her face the world alone again. "You're not alone," I said firmly. "Not now, not ever. You've got me. And we'll figure this out together." I could see her trying to hold back the emotions she didn't want to show. But it was clear that she wanted to believe me. She wanted to believe that someone cared. And in that moment, I realized that we were both healing. Slowly, piece by piece. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be setbacks, moments of fear and doubt. But we would face it all together. I didn't have all the answers. Hell, I barely had any answers at all. But I had something real now. I had a purpose. And that was enough for me to keep going. Emma looked at me for the first time in what felt like hours, her eyes meeting mine. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't need to hear it, but hearing it made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were living. And that was enough. I sat in the dimly lit room, staring at the door as if it held the answers to everything I had been asking myself. The rain had stopped outside, but it left the streets wet and slick, mirroring the confusion swirling in my head. Emma was still asleep, her small form curled up under the thin blanket, her breathing steady but soft. For the first time in days, the air in the room felt calm. But beneath the stillness, I could feel the tension building, tension that had nothing to do with the rain or the storm outside. It was the tension of uncertainty, the unknown future that loomed ahead of us. It had been a week since I found her. A week since everything in my world had been flipped upside down. I had spent years running away from everything that mattered, hiding behind a reputation, a motorcycle, and the faded leather of my Hells Angels patch. But now, here I was, caring for a little girl, a child who needed more than just shelter. She needed to know that she wasn't just another ghost in the wind, another victim of the world's indifference. And I was the one who had to help her figure out what came next. I couldn't just play the protector forever. I had no idea what she had gone through or what kind of life she had lived before I found her. The emotional scars she carried were deep, and every time I looked at her, I felt the weight of that. I wasn't sure how to help her heal from it. I wasn't even sure I knew how to heal myself. But as I sat there, I realized something. I wasn't going to leave her. Not now. Not when she needed someone to trust, someone to believe in. The sound of the door creaking open startled me. I turned, my hand instinctively moving toward the gun I kept close, a habit I hadn't shaken. But when I saw Emma standing there, her eyes wide with curiosity and something else, something softer, I felt the tension in my body melt. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice still small, but stronger than before. She had started speaking more recently, not much, but enough to show that she wasn't as withdrawn as she used to be. Nothing, just thinking, I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. Come sit down. You've been up for a while now. Emma hesitated before crossing the room, the barest hint of a smile on her lips as she sat down. I could see it in her eyes, the same thing I saw in my own reflection when I had nothing left. Fear, yes, but also a desire to be something more than the circumstances she had been given. What happens now? She asked after a long silence. The question hit me harder than I expected. What had happened now? What was I supposed to do? I wasn't an expert in taking care of kids. I wasn't even sure I knew how to live a normal life. The road had been my home for so long, and the life I led was filled with danger, violence, and loyalty to a brotherhood that had turned its back on me. But here I was, a man trying to do the right thing. For her. We figure it out, I said, more to myself than to her. One step at a time. She nodded, her expression softening. I could tell she wasn't convinced, but that was okay. She didn't have to be. The truth was, I wasn't sure where to go from here either. I didn't have a plan, and maybe I never would. But for the first time, I knew what I had to do. I had to be there for her. That was the start. You trust me? I asked her, my voice steady but unsure. She looked up at me, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. She wasn't sure. I could tell. But she had taken the first step by asking the question. That was something. I trust you, she said quietly, almost as if she was trying the words on for size. I nodded, a small sense of relief flooding through me. We had a long way to go, but hearing her say those words meant something. It meant we were no longer strangers. We were a team. Good, I said. We'll get through this together. I promise. The words didn't feel like they came from a man used to making promises. I wasn't that man. But for Emma, I would try to be. For the first time in my life, I wanted to be someone who could keep a promise. We sat there in the quiet, the hum of the outside world just a distant memory. The storm had passed, but it wasn't the only storm that had to be weathered. The real work was just beginning. But as I looked at Emma, I realized something else, too. Maybe this was the reason I had been brought here. To her. To help her find her way. And in doing so, maybe I'd find mine. I woke up to the sound of Emma moving around in the room. The first few days had been filled with silence. But now, she was starting to talk more, move more, and even smile a little. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Progress that meant the world to me. The sun was up, the early morning light coming through the cracked blinds, casting a soft glow on the room. I got up and stretched, feeling the muscles in my back crack as I did. The past week had been exhausting, emotionally and physically. Taking care of Emma wasn't easy, but I was starting to feel like I was actually doing something right. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a purpose. I had never been great at being present for people. I had always been the guy who kept to himself, kept moving, never stopped long enough to care. But with Emma, things were different. I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't keep running. I had to stay. I grabbed a cup of coffee from the counter and sat down on the bed next to her. She was sitting up now, her legs hanging off the edge, staring down at her hands. Her hair was still a mess, but she was starting to look healthier, and that gave me hope. How are you doing? I asked her, my voice soft, trying not to startle her. She didn't look up at me right away, but after a moment, she gave a small shrug. I'm okay, she said, her voice quiet, as if she wasn't sure if it was okay to be okay. I could see the internal struggle in her eyes. She wanted to trust, but she didn't know how. She had been hurt before, left to fend for herself, and I wasn't sure she knew how to let anyone in. You don't have to be okay, I said gently. You don't have to feel anything right now. We're just figuring things out, all right? She nodded slowly, but the doubt in her eyes didn't fade. She didn't believe it yet, and I couldn't blame her. It wasn't easy to believe in someone when your world had been shattered over and over again. I'll be here, I added, trying to make her understand. For as long as you need me. That seemed to make her think. She looked up at me, her big eyes searching mine for some kind of truth. For something real. I wasn't sure if I had it in me, but I was doing my best to show her that I wasn't going anywhere. You mean it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. Yeah, I mean it. I'm not going anywhere, Emma. You can trust me. The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth, but they were the truth. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't know exactly what to do next, but I knew that I couldn't walk away from her. Not now. Not when she was starting to trust me. Not when I was starting to trust myself again. The silence between us stretched for a moment, neither of us knowing what to say next. But then Emma stood up slowly, her legs shaky, and walked over to the small window. She stood there, looking out at the world beyond the motel, her face unreadable. I watched her for a moment, wondering what was going on in her head. After a few minutes, she spoke again. "I used to think I was alone," she said softly, almost as if she was talking to herself. Like nobody cared. Like I was just forgotten. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I could hear the weight in her voice, the pain she had carried for so long, the way she had learned to survive on her own, without anyone to lean on. And I understood that. I had been there too. But now? I asked, trying to push the conversation forward. She turned to look at me, a faint glimmer of something in her eyes. "Now? I don't know," she said, her voice small but sincere. "Now it's different." I got up and walked over to her, standing by her side. We both stared out the window, watching the cars drive by on the wet streets. The world seemed to be moving, oblivious to the fact that we were standing still, stuck in this little motel room, trying to figure out what came next. But I could feel something shifting between us. Emma wasn't the same girl I had found in that alley, shivering and starving. She was beginning to find her way out of the darkness, little by little. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was helping her do that. I wasn't sure what came next for either of us, but I knew one thing. We were in this together. And for the first time, I wasn't scared of what that meant. I stood in the doorway, watching as Emma carefully moved around the small room, gathering the things she had scattered around in a quiet order. She was getting better at adjusting, more aware of her surroundings, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw a small spark of hope in her actions. It was something subtle, but it was there. It was almost as if she was trying to reclaim a piece of herself. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. I wasn't sure what to do next, or if I even had the answers for her. I had kept her safe, kept my promise to protect her, but I knew that alone wasn't enough. The trust that had started to form between us was fragile, like glass, and every day felt like a step closer to either shattering or building something stronger. "Hey, you doing okay?" I asked. She looked up at me, pausing for a moment before answering. "Yeah," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I'm just thinking about stuff." I could tell she didn't want to talk about whatever was going on in her mind, and I wasn't going to push. I had learned that much. Emma wasn't ready to open up, and that was fine. I couldn't force her to heal any faster than she was ready to. It was a slow process, and I had to let her move at her own pace. I turned and walked over to the small kitchenette, grabbing a cup of coffee. The silence between us stretched out, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence you get when you've started to find a rhythm with someone. A quiet understanding that didn't need words. I leaned against the counter, watching her for a moment. "You know," I said after a while, trying to break the quiet, "I'm not the best at this whole looking after someone thing, but I'm trying. I just want you to know that." She didn't respond right away, but I saw her glance up at me, her expression softening. I didn't know if she understood what I meant, but I could see the faintest glimmer of trust in her eyes. It was enough for now. "You're doing fine," she said quietly, almost to herself. I smiled, but I knew that things weren't as simple as just doing fine. We both had a long way to go, but hearing her say that made me feel like maybe I wasn't as lost as I thought. It wasn't just about protecting her. It was about showing her that the world didn't have to be as cruel as it had been, that there was still room for kindness, for second chances. And maybe, just maybe, there was room for redemption for me, too. The day went on, and we spent it in relative peace. We didn't talk much, but that was okay. I could see she was beginning to trust me, even if it was in small, quiet ways. Every time she looked at me, her eyes weren't filled with the same fear they had been before. There was a quiet calm between us now, something that hadn't been there when I first found her. That was progress. When the sun began to set, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Emma had started to settle in. She wasn't as afraid as she had been when she first arrived. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close. But it was real. And that meant something. I got up from the couch, stretching my legs as I walked to the window. The world outside was starting to settle into the cool night, the streets empty except for the occasional car passing by. I looked back at Emma, who had curled up on the bed, a book in her lap. She was still distant, still lost in her own thoughts, but she was here. She was safe. And that was all I could do for now. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if she would ever be able to let go of her past. But I wasn't going anywhere. I made a promise to her, and I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I realized that the road I had been running on was no longer mine to follow alone. I had someone to protect now, someone who needed me. And as much as I had been afraid of being needed, of letting someone rely on me, I found that maybe that was the one thing that could save me. Tomorrow's a new day, I said, turning back to her. She glanced up from her book, meeting my eyes for a moment before nodding. Yeah, she said softly, a new day. I didn't have any illusions about what that meant, but it felt like a step in the right direction. We were both starting over. And that was something. I stood by the window, staring out into the quiet, early morning light. The city was still waking up, and there was a sense of calm in the air that I hadn't felt in a long time. Emma was still asleep, her small form wrapped up in blankets, her breathing steady. I watched her for a moment, thinking about how much had changed since I first found her. When I had taken her in, I wasn't sure what to expect, but as the days passed, I realized that she wasn't the only one who needed to heal. I had my own scars, my own past that I had been running from for years. But now, looking at her, I could see that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward for both of us. The past few days had been filled with small moments of progress. Emma had started to talk more, to show interest in the world around her. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me believe that she could find her way out of the darkness she had been living in. She had been through more than any child should have to endure, and I knew that I couldn't fix everything overnight. But I also knew that if I kept being there for her, if I kept my promise to protect her, she might just start to believe that things could get better. I turned away from the window and walked over to the small kitchen area. The coffee pot was still hot from earlier, and I poured myself a cup. As the dark liquid filled the mug, I thought about what I needed to do next. I couldn't keep hiding in this motel room forever. Emma deserved more than this. She deserved a real chance at a life where she wasn't looking over her shoulder, wondering when the next disaster would strike. I had no idea where we were going to go, or how we would get there, but I knew I couldn't keep her here forever. We need a plan. I muttered to myself, staring at the coffee. I didn't have much to offer her in terms of stability. The life I had led before was a far cry from the kind of life I wanted to give Emma. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I was going to figure this out. I had to. As I took a sip of coffee, I heard Emma stirring in the other room. I didn't need to look up to know she was waking up. It was the first time in a while that I didn't feel the overwhelming urge to run, to disappear into the night. I felt like I had something worth staying for. I walked over to the door of the bedroom and knocked softly before opening it. Morning, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. How are you feeling today? Emma was sitting up in bed, rubbing her eyes. She looked up at me, a tired but real smile on her face. I'm okay, she said, her voice soft but steady. It was the first time she had said that without a hint of doubt. For the first time, I believed her. You ready to go out for a walk today? I asked, trying to keep things light. She nodded slowly, then stood up, stretching a bit as she did. I could tell she was still getting used to being in a new place, to the idea of having some kind of stability. But she was trying, and that was enough. We spent the next hour walking around the neighborhood, getting some fresh air and stretching our legs. It was a quiet area, not much happening, but that was exactly what we needed. The slow pace gave us time to talk, to be together without the pressure of the world outside. As we walked, I could see Emma starting to relax. She wasn't as guarded as she had been in the beginning. She was still quiet, still hesitant at times, but she was opening up, even if just a little. We stopped in front of a small park, and I sat down on the bench while Emma wandered over to the swings. She pushed herself gently, the motion slow and steady. I watched her for a while, thinking about the way her body moved, how she had started to feel just a little more at ease. Maybe she wasn't ready to talk about the past, but that didn't matter. She was here now. She was safe now. I leaned back on the bench and took a deep breath. I didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, I felt like I was on the right track. I wasn't just holding on to the past anymore. I wasn't running. I was staying, doing the best I could to help Emma find her way. After a while, Emma stopped swinging and came over to sit next to me on the bench. She looked up at me with those big eyes, full of questions. Do you think things will get better? She asked quietly. The question hit me harder than I expected. I didn't have an easy answer, but I wasn't about to lie to her. I think they will, I said, my voice steady but full of sincerity. We'll figure it out. One step at a time. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that felt real, not forced. And in that moment, I realized that I was no longer just trying to protect her. I was learning to live again, to care again. Together, we could rebuild. And that, for both of us, was the first step towards something better. I woke up to the sound of Emma moving around in the room again, the soft shuffle of her feet across the worn carpet breaking the stillness of the morning. It was a sound that had become strangely comforting over the past few days. There was something about hearing her in the space, moving freely without fear, that made it feel like things were slowly, but surely, starting to change for both of us. The air outside had that crisp bite to it, the kind of chill that reminded you the seasons were shifting. The world was changing, and so were we. I rubbed my face with my hand, the tiredness from the last week weighing heavy on my shoulders. This wasn't easy. None of this was. But as I looked over at Emma, standing by the window, her hands resting on the sill as she stared out, I knew I couldn't stop now. She was still quiet in the mornings, lost in her own thoughts, but there was a subtle shift in the way she looked at the world. She wasn't just existing anymore. She was starting to engage with it, little by little. "Morning," I said, my voice a bit rough as I stood and stretched. She turned to me, her hair falling over her eyes as she brushed it aside. A faint smile played on her lips, the kind that had become more common, but still not frequent. "Morning," she replied, her voice a little warmer than before. She didn't look as distant as she once had, and that, in itself, was progress. "You want some breakfast?" I asked, trying to keep things normal. She nodded, but there was a hesitation in her eyes. She was still figuring out how to trust, how to allow herself to feel safe, but I could see it. She was trying. That was all I could ask for. I went to the small kitchenette and made some eggs and toast, the routine comforting in its simplicity. As I cooked, I glanced over at Emma, watching her for a moment as she sat at the small table, fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. There was something fragile about the way she held herself, as if she was waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for something to go wrong. And I knew what that felt like. I had been there too many times to count, waiting for the world to come crashing down. But this time, I wasn't going to let that happen. Not to her. Not to either of us. "You ever think about what you want to do next?" I asked casually, breaking the silence. She looked up at me, a bit startled by the question, but then she shrugged, her gaze shifting away as she considered the answer. "I don't really know," she said softly. "I guess. I just want to be okay. I don't want to keep moving. I don't want to be scared anymore." Her words hit me harder than I expected. The simplicity of what she wanted, of what she needed, was overwhelming. She wasn't asking for much. Just safety. Just a chance to be okay. And I knew, deep down, that I would do whatever it took to give her that. "You will be okay," I said, turning to look at her. "I promise. We'll figure it out." I saw her eyes flicker with uncertainty, but she nodded anyway, not fully believing it, but willing to try. That was all I could ask for. After breakfast, we went out for another walk. I had started taking her around the neighborhood, just to get out of the room, to get some fresh air. It wasn't much, but it was a step toward something different. We walked side by side, the quietness between us comfortable now. I could tell she was thinking about something, her mind drifting away, but she didn't say anything. And that was fine. She didn't have to say everything. She didn't have to explain every thought, every feeling. I could see the change in her. It wasn't dramatic, but it was there. She was starting to open up, even if only a little at a time. I knew the past would always be there, lingering in the background, but it didn't have to define her. It didn't have to control her. She had a future ahead of her, one that was hers to shape, not one that was dictated by the ghosts of what she had been through. We reached the park again, and this time, she was the first to sit on the swings. I watched her push herself back and forth, the motion slow at first, but then gaining momentum. It was like she was testing the waters, seeing how far she could go before she was forced to stop. I stood off to the side, leaning against a tree as I watched her, feeling a quiet sense of pride. She was starting to trust the world again, starting to believe that it wasn't just a place that hurt people, that there was still good in it, still hope. I took a deep breath, the weight of everything in the past few days settling on my shoulders. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew I wasn't walking away. I wasn't going to leave her alone again. I didn't have all the answers, and maybe I never would. But I knew one thing. This was the right thing. This was where I was supposed to be. And together, We were going to figure it out. The days that followed felt different. The weight of uncertainty that had been hanging over us for so long began to lift, slowly, almost imperceptibly. We found a rhythm, Emma and I. It wasn't perfect, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it was enough. The awkward silences were fewer, the walls between us crumbling little by little. Each day was a small victory. I could see it in the way Emma's eyes looked at me now. Less guarded, less wary, a bit more trusting. It wasn't much, but it was everything. We were making it through. There were still moments where the shadows of her past crept in, where I could see the fear in her eyes as if she were bracing herself for something to go wrong. And there were still times when I felt like I didn't have the answers. I wasn't a perfect protector, and I never would be. But I wasn't running anymore, and for once, that felt like enough. We started to explore more, venturing out of the motel room a little more each day. The weather was getting warmer, the sun lingering longer in the sky. It felt like the world was slowly waking up, too, shaking off the cold and the quiet that had settled over us. The world outside was still overwhelming at times, but Emma was learning how to navigate it again, step by step. I could see her starting to smile more, even if it was just a little, even if it was brief. It was a sign of something new, something I hadn't seen before, the first flickers of hope. One afternoon, after a quiet lunch, we decided to take a walk around the park. It had become a routine for us, a way to get out, stretch our legs, and clear our heads. Emma had started to talk a little more, not much, but enough to let me know she was thinking, processing. As we walked, I noticed the way she looked at the world, the way she was beginning to notice the little things, the way the sunlight broke through the trees, the sound of kids laughing in the distance, the quiet hum of life happening around us. "You're starting to look at things differently," I said, my voice casual, but it was an observation that meant more than it sounded. Emma looked up at me, her gaze thoughtful. "I guess I am," she said, her voice small but steady. "It's weird, you know? I didn't think I'd ever be able to see anything good again. But I think maybe I can." I stopped walking and turned to her. "You can't," I said firmly. "You've got a whole life ahead of you, Emma, and you don't have to do it alone." She nodded, her eyes softening as she looked up at me. It was a moment of connection, one that was quiet but powerful. She wasn't the same scared girl I had found in that alley. She was growing. She was becoming something stronger, and I was here for it. For the first time since I found her, I realized that I had started to heal too. Not just from the scars of my past, but from the weight of the choices I had made. I had spent so long running, never allowing myself to truly feel anything, never allowing myself to connect with anyone. But now, with Emma by my side, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, purpose. We continued walking, side by side, our footsteps in sync. The world was still a chaotic place, full of unknowns and challenges, but as long as we had each other, it didn't feel quite so overwhelming. We didn't have all the answers, and we didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but we were facing it together. That was enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the path, I realized that we had come a long way. The road ahead wasn't clear, but I didn't need it to be. We had each other, and that was all we needed. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking for an escape. I was looking forward, and that was the most powerful thing I had ever felt. In this gripping chapter of Hell Angels stories, we follow a hardened biker who, after years of running from his past, finds himself unexpectedly responsible for a young girl who has been abandoned and left to survive on her own. As they begin their journey together, the story explores the deep, emotional connection that forms between the biker and the girl, revealing how they both start to heal from their traumatic pasts. Hell Angels stories often feature intense moments of vulnerability, and in this tale, the biker is forced to confront his past and redefine his own identity as he learns to care for someone other than himself. The trust that grows between the two characters is fragile but profound, and through their bond, the biker discovers a new sense of purpose. As the story unfolds, the themes of redemption, healing, and personal growth come to the forefront, showing that even the most broken individuals can find the strength to rebuild their lives. This captivating journey in Hell Angels stories offers a powerful reminder that hope can emerge from the darkest places, and no matter how lost you may feel, there's always a chance to find your way back. From the biker's perspective, This tale becomes a powerful exploration of change, redemption, and the profound impact of a young girl's presence on his life. As their bond grows stronger, it's clear that their journey together is just beginning, and the lessons learned along the way will leave a lasting impression. Hell Angels stories often deal with raw emotions and a sense of survival, and in this one, we see both characters slowly find solace in each other, overcoming the odds that have been stacked against them.